Jane had always dreamed of moving to the beautiful town of Truckee, California. She had finally landed her dream job as a market researcher and was able to afford her own flat in a nice neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect, and Jane was excited to start this new chapter in her life. She spent the first few days settling into her new flat, unpacking boxes and decorating the space to make it feel like home. But little did she know, her new home would soon turn into a nightmare. One evening, as Jane was getting ready for bed, she noticed a strange man lurking outside her window. She quickly closed the curtains and tried to think of it as her imagination playing tricks on her. However, the next day, she saw the same man standing outside her building, staring up at her window. She couldn't shake off the feeling of unease, but she tried to convince herself that it was just a coincidence. But as the days went by, Jane started noticing the man following her everywhere she went. He would show up at her workplace, at the grocery store, and even at the park where she went for her daily runs. She tried to confront him, but he always managed to slip away before she could get a good look at his face. Jane's fear turned into paranoia, and she started locking all her doors and windows at night. She even considered getting a security system installed, but she couldn't afford it on her tight budget. She started to feel like she was constantly being watched, and her once beautiful flat now felt like a prison. One night, as Jane was about to go to bed, she heard a knock on her door. She cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole, only to see the same man standing outside. She panicked and called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. Jane couldn't take it anymore. She decided to confront her stalker once and for all. She went to the park where she usually saw him and waited for him to show up. When he finally did, she followed him to a secluded area and demanded to know why he was stalking her. To her horror, the man revealed that he had been watching her for weeks and had fallen in love with her. He claimed that she was his soulmate and that he would do anything to be with her. Jane was horrified and tried to run away, but the man grabbed her and dragged her into his truck. As they drove out of the city, Jane's mind raced with fear and panic. She knew she had to escape, but she was trapped in the truck with her stalker. She begged and pleaded with him to let her go, but he only laughed and said he would never let her leave. They arrived at a remote cabin in the woods, and Jane's worst fears came true. Her stalker had been planning this all along. He tied her up and tortured her for days, both physically and mentally. She was helpless and alone, and she knew that she would never make it out alive. As Jane took her last breath, she couldn't help but think of how her dream had turned into a nightmare. She never thought that her move to Truckee would end in such a horrific way. But her story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most beautiful places can hold the darkest secrets. Emily was your typical 16-year-old student at a high school in San Diego. She had a great group of friends, excelled in her classes, and was even on the cheerleading squad. Life was good for Emily until one day her world was turned upside down. It all started with Tom, a bully who went to the same high school as Emily. He had always had his eye on her, but she never paid him any attention. He would make fun of her in the hallways, but she would just brush it off and continue on with her day. Little did she know, Tom was not just a bully, but also her stalker. Tom would follow Emily home from school, watching her every move. He would even sneak into her backyard at night, spying on her through her bedroom window. Emily had no idea that she was being watched. One day, she was alone in the school library, studying for a test. As she was intensely focused on her notes, she suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. She turned around, expecting to see a fellow classmate, but instead, she saw Tom. He had a sinister look in his eyes as he approached her. "Hey there, Emily," Tom said with a twisted smile. Emily's heart started racing as she tried to gather her things and leave, but Tom was quick to grab her arm. "Where do you think you're going?" he sneered. Emily's mind was racing as she realized she was alone with her stalker. She tried to scream, but Tom covered her mouth with his hand. He then proceeded to molest her right there in the school library. Emily was terrified and felt completely helpless. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her. She tried to fight back, but Tom was too strong. After what felt like hours, Tom finally left, leaving Emily traumatized and alone. She was too scared to tell anyone what had happened. She was afraid of what Tom might do if she told on him. Emily tried to act like everything was normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread every time she saw Tom at school. Meanwhile, Tom continued to stalk and harass Emily. He would leave notes in her locker and even followed her to the mall one day. Emily was constantly looking over her shoulder, feeling like she was being watched at all times. One day, Emily confided in her best friend, Candace, about what had happened in the library. Candace was horrified and convinced Emily to tell the school counselor. They both went to the counselor together, and Emily finally broke down and told the whole story. The school took immediate action, and Tom was arrested for his actions. Emily finally felt a sense of relief, but she knew that the trauma she had experienced would stay with her forever. Tom was expelled from school, and Emily no longer had to worry about being followed or harassed. She was able to finish high school without any further incidents, but the memories of that day in the library still haunted her. It was a chilly autumn night in Chicago, and the streets were bustling with people trying to escape the cold. Among them was Emma, a young and attractive actor who was on her way to meet a man she had matched with on Tinder. His name was Bill, and he was a computer engineer. They had been chatting for a few weeks now and decided to finally go on a date. Emma arrived at the restaurant, a trendy spot in the heart of downtown Chicago. She spotted Bill waiting for her at a corner table, and she got butterflies in her stomach. He was even more handsome in person, with his piercing blue eyes and charming smile. They hit it off immediately, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about their careers, hobbies, and dreams. As the night went on, Emma found herself drawn to Bill. He was intelligent, funny, and had a kind heart. She couldn't believe her luck in finding someone like him on a dating app. After dinner, they decided to take a walk by the lakefront, admiring the city lights and enjoying each other's company. However, what Emma didn't know was that this date would be the beginning of her worst nightmare. After saying goodnight to Bill and heading back to her apartment, she didn't think much of it when he asked for a goodnight kiss. But what she didn't know was that Bill had already developed an unhealthy obsession with her. From that night on, Emma started receiving numerous texts and calls from Bill. At first, she thought it was sweet and endearing, But as the days went by, the messages became more frequent and intense. He would send her poems and love letters, and even showed up unannounced at her workplace. Emma started to feel uncomfortable and realized that she had made a big mistake by going out with him. She tried to politely tell him that she wasn't interested, but Bill wouldn't take no for an answer. He became increasingly possessive and would show up everywhere she went. Emma started to feel like she was constantly being watched, and her once peaceful life turned into a living nightmare. One day, Emma received a package in the mail. It was a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a note that read, "You will be mine, Emma, forever and always." This made her flesh crawl, and she knew that she was in a serious situation. She immediately called the police, but they couldn't do much since Bill hadn't done anything illegal yet. Emma's friends and family started to notice the change in her behavior. She became paranoid and even changed her apartment. She was so traumatized that she started seeing a therapist to cope with the fear and anxiety, but nothing could prepare her for what happened next. One night, Emma was out with her friends when she got a call from her roommate. She sounded panicked and told her that someone had broken into their apartment. Emma rushed home and found her roommate huddled in a corner, sobbing. The apartment was in shambles, and there was a note stained with blood on the kitchen counter that read, "I will always find you, Emma." The police were finally able to track down Bill and arrested him for stalking and breaking into Emma's apartment. It was then that Emma found out that Bill had a history of stalking and had been fired from his previous job for harassing a co-worker. She couldn't believe that she had been so blind and trusted a stranger from a dating app. Emma's life was forever changed by that one fateful date. She had gone from being a carefree young woman to a victim of a terrifying stalker. It took her a long time to heal from the trauma, but she never forgot the lesson she learned. Always be cautious when meeting someone from the internet. You never know who might be hiding behind that charming smile.